There we are. Hey.
There we go.
Welcome.
I'm going to unmute myself. Yeah, it's...
You're unmuted.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to Techstars Startup Weekend Iowa Online Edition. We have been building late into the evening. We started last night and have been enjoying the opportunity for participants to not only come together and learn more about each other and connect with each other in this online environment, but also starting to build into two different teams. We've got some excitement happening in a kind of a head-to-head battle, I suppose. And so this morning, as we woke up and fired up some caffeinated conversations bright and early, we have also enjoyed some conversations both within the teams and with mentors, talking about the entrepreneurial ecosystem activity, the future of education. The conversations have been riveting already this morning. And so we're going to continue that path of energy with our kickoff conversation and keynote this morning. We've got Shauna Casey joining us and Curdy Levy, who are going to enjoy a virtual fireside chat together. And I'm looking forward to it. I think this is going to be a treat that can be timeless. There's some cool history that we're going to learn about within the Startup Weekend storyline, but also some of the activities that entrepreneurs can explore as they're building within a Startup Weekend environment, but also as entrepreneurs building in an ongoing basis. And so, Curdy, it's great to have you here this morning. Thank you for facilitating this keynote conversation.
Happy to be here. So Curdy Levy, Managing Director of Techstars Iowa, and we're in our second year. And so this is so fun to get the whole community together and really see people from across Iowa, but also I have to say one of my teams that I was mentoring earlier, they've got members calling in from the UK, from Canada, and from India. So we've got quite the international flair going in Iowa. We're attracting people from all over, which is super fun. But one of the things that we were talking about in that group was the idea, it's a word that I'm going to lean into more, kismet, from Turkish origin, which is serendipity. And one of the great things about Startup Weekend, and in this case, the virtual one, is I got to meet Shauna, and I'm sort of like, why don't I know you already? So it's the bumping into people that you really click with, and you know that you have lots in common and you just have not had the opportunity to meet yet. So it's my real pleasure to chat with Shauna this morning. And, you know, Shauna, she's currently CEO of Weekdays, which is so cool. Micro schools, who knew? Like, this is awesome. We can't wait to hear more about that. But she also has been a venture capitalist with Madrona VC, and she is one of the OGs of Startup Weekend in general. And I think it'll be really fun to hear about the history of Startup Weekend, your involvement in it, and some of the things you've seen over the years. So why don't we start with that?
Sounds great. I feel like we should all start like a tech morning show or something between everybody's doing such a great job.
That's right.
Yeah. Do you want to talk a little bit about the early days of Startup Weekend as we jump in?
Well, maybe, you got involved, 7 or so years ago? I'm not sure exactly the timeline, but maybe give your history with Startup Weekend and where it was then. And what maybe the original goals were around Startup Weekend.
Yeah, well, some folks in the startup community kind of know a little bit about the story, but Andrew Hyde initially planned this event, a 54-hour long, essentially getting entrepreneurs in a room to work on startup ideas. And I believe it was 2007. And then Mark and Clint came in from Seattle and really took over the organization and started scaling it. And eventually, and we kind of all know where we are now, 150 countries, Startup Weekend is in more countries than Starbucks has locations, which is kind of a neat, just neat to know that we're part of this really big community. And now, being 10 plus, 12 plus years old, it's a history of entrepreneurs that have gone on to do really exciting things. I'll just say it'll be fun to jump into a little bit of the customer discovery conversation, because it brings me back to our startup weekend office in Seattle. The headquarters was right near Amazon, one of the headquarters locations, and there was a Starbucks nearby, and we would go to that Starbucks and do customer discovery. Weekly we would be at that Starbucks. So I feel like the people who frequented that Starbucks would just keep seeing us asking different questions. And I don't know what they thought at that time, but
those people were real generalists. They had to answer questions about everything. That's great. No, it is funny. And in the live version of Startup Weekend, which I participated in too, just that rush out there and kind of everyone learning how to do customer discovery for the first time, and just asking point blank, oh my gosh, what are you into? Would you do this? Would you do that? I mean, it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun. I look forward to those days, and we do hope that we will be doing in-person startup weekends across the state, obviously across the world, but in Iowa, we're hoping to really proliferate Startup Weekend in person across the whole state, which is great. So your role, you were in marketing for Startup Weekend early on. When you go out to a new country and or a new location, like how does it all start? Who jumps in? Like who gets involved with Startup Weekend?
Yeah, it's a lot like, I think the group here, I've been to Startup Weekends all over the country, and the thing that is similar is it's always a really sort of scrappy community coming together, believing anything is possible. And so even though I would be in different areas and the languages would be different, it always felt like I'm sort of at the same event, as well as the format's always the same. But yeah, I actually started helping launch as a volunteer Startup Weekend in other countries before joining Startup Weekend as an actual full-time employee. And part of my goal was really making sure that we could get overlooked potential entrepreneurs in the room. And a lot of times that meant, how do we get more women involved? Because in the early days, it wasn't really as diverse as we wanted it to be.
Yeah.
And yeah, so it was, it's interesting because it just feels like it felt like the same, like if you would have gone to a Startup Weekend in another country, it would have been like, you would have instantly been friends with everybody.
Yep, that's the way it feels
in the room, which is one of the best things. Yeah.
That's right. I've already met, a handful of people here who I'd never seen before, and I feel like I could easily just pick up a conversation with them and just go. I know more about them in just a few minutes, so it's really, really great. How fun! So as these teams come together, that is a really interesting dynamic, right? So just thinking about as ideas are thrown out there and teams start jumping in, what was the initial, what was the thinking around that? Throw an idea out there and get people from different backgrounds to jump in. We're seeing it happen here today, but it just happens so naturally, which is incredible. What are some of the cool teams that you've seen come together, if you can remember any, that have maybe gotten together and stayed and created something?
Yeah, well, I'll just say it's interesting because everybody kind of, the first time usually you come to Startup Weekend, you come, just to learn. You don't really know what team you're going to join or necessarily how it's going to work. And a lot of us in the earlier days, then we started planning ahead for our next Startup Weekend, which I think a lot of anyone who's watching this can do, where you might form some team members early on, or maybe you get the same team together that you worked on another weekend. And you might even come in with an idea already halfway formed. And so I saw that happen with one of the unicorns that's come out of Startup Weekend called Rover, which is dog boarding and dog walking and dog services. And it was really neat to see that one, because there was a group of us from Seattle that were just really involved in would go to a lot of startup weekends or mentor or judge them. And sometimes we would jump back in and still participate. And one of those people was Greg Gottesman, who is a venture capitalist out of Seattle. And it was fun to see him. There weren't a lot of VCs coming to Startup Weekend in the early days, but Greg was one of them. There was a few kind of high profile founders that had already had an exit, but Greg was one of the only VCs. And so he had this idea before the event started, but he really wanted to launch it, from what I saw, at Startup Weekend. And so he came in, pitched the idea, had a team form really quickly. And then, immediately after Startup Weekend, they made it a company, and they incorporated, and they were kind of off to the races. And they just IPO'd recently. Rover did, and so it's been, a really interesting story to watch them. But it was the kind of story of going to Startup Weekend, having a great time learning about it, seeing what's possible, and then for the next one, planning ahead and kind of pre-planning for success.
Yep, for sure. Another neat thing is that startup weekends are really beginning to not only diversify, you talked about those early days of getting women to join, now really reaching out and trying to get people from all different areas, people who really maybe were not exposed to entrepreneurship at all in their particular communities, but also youth and people who are maybe toward the end of their careers. I mean, people are jumping in of all ages. I know my daughter experienced a startup weekend in Iowa at Iowa City and loved it. And it has really opened her eyes to, what, maybe I don't need to work for someone else. Maybe I can be my own boss. And I think that's such an eye opener. And then for those who have been in larger organizations, being able to come to a startup weekend and kind of chart their paths in the second half of life. I mean, there's real value there too. Have you seen a lot of different types of ages and different backgrounds come together?
Yeah, one of my favorite events to attend is by the way, I love that story. I think we should talk more about that story because that's like, you really kind of nailed it on the head of what, people often come to Startup Weekend thinking they're going to start a company, but they leave becoming an entrepreneur, and those seeds of entrepreneurship really planted. And oftentimes they'll, kind of similar to what we were just talking about before, they'll get together with those same people and start a company in the future, or really they'll just leave knowing that it's possible. And I think we've seen that. My favorite thing is we've seen it now across ages. If you're exposed to it in college or in high school, then you already have that mentality. You're sort of 10 steps ahead because you already have that mentality and a tiny bit of experience behind it. What did she attend? Did she attend a startup weekend? And then
did. Yeah. I would say my participation in it was just finding it. So I was, she wanted just to, she had an idea, and I thought, she's got an idea. I should figure out if I can help her find something to expand on this idea. And thankfully, Jay Cooper over in Iowa City said, yeah, we'll take high schoolers. We've had a 13-year-old who started a company, and he's like this amazing coder. I'm like, great, we're coming over. And I dropped her off, and she really took it from there. And I think the experience of meeting people, as a 16 who were in their late 20s, and kind of keep sticking with her idea and really expanding on it. And she got into the customer discovery, and they were walking around the mall near in the University of Iowa has this great pedestrian mall kind of modeled after Boulder. So very conducive to interviews. Although this is a Saturday and a Sunday. Like it's not, you know, not everyone's out, but still we were able to talk to a lot of people, and that team ended up winning a prize of coaching for 6 months. So they got startup coaching for 6 months. Eventually, the team disbanded, but she kept the idea going, and she actually built a little app or web app, sorry, I should say, sort of low cost MVP web app. And she actually got some users, and it still technically exists, but it is a side thing for her now. She's now in college. So, but it definitely got the juices flowing, and she is going to be working in entrepreneurship for a long time.
That's such a great story.
Yeah. No, it's fun. The other thing I've seen kind of on the other end of the spectrum are people who have come out and, have been in a corporate environment for a long time, and then come over and maybe joined a team and either stuck with it and created either a small business or become an advisor and a mentor. And so those are some exciting things to see. And those are very local. I've seen them happen, in Iowa, but it's definitely opportunity. So, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that was me. I was at a corporate job, and Startup Weekend was my first really entrance into the startup world. Then the very earliest one that I attended, which I think was like 2008 or 2009.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Well, one of the things that members from the workforce bring in is some of that kind of, here's some ideas. I've kind of done this before. And so for people who haven't really delved into business before, some of those easy answers, putting together the financial model, right? Or thinking about, well, how do you actually put together, how do we actually order this? How do we actually market this to customers, right? Mentors are there. It's also great to have team members who can help out and do those things as well. But the idea of bringing that really incredible knowledge into one place for a short amount of time is amazing. One of the companies I was just talking to, mentoring today, was really trying to lean into customer discovery. How do we figure out who our customer is? I thought we could talk about that a little bit, because everyone always seems to kind of get to that. Everyone's got the great coding, skills, and they've got the idea and the product, like it's all designed. And then they say, okay, who's going to buy this? They have to go out there and do that. Let's maybe try to give them some tips on how to do customer discovery well when you are rushing in 24 hours to do it.
Yeah, I think some things that I've seen, and maybe I'll share a little bit, not only from Startup Weekend, but from, working at a venture firm, because it kind of ties into the early days of finding signal on an idea. And part of finding signal is the customer, all the way up to, pitching it, for instance, to an investor if somebody wants to continue with the idea. And so what I've seen most often out of Startup Weekend is you'll think about, usually they'll come up with your idea with a hypothesis in mind of who the customer is. And sometimes it might be 1 or 2 or 3 buckets. And, from best practices, I've really seen that those should be separated so that you can learn about each one if they're different enough, versus bucketing them all in one and assuming it's all one customer. By the way, I will say, even for advanced startups, this is one of the top 3 things that I see startups do wrong, is not enough customer development, discovery, and not often enough, because it's not a one-time thing. This is something that you need to keep doing as your startup progresses. So coming out of Startup Weekend, I've really seen most of the teams start with, really it's usually phone calls or going, sometimes it's in person, going somewhere, which is one of the hardest steps, because it's also one of the most awkward if you're not very outgoing to jump on the phone to get somebody on the phone and then to ask them questions. And so, for instance, if your customer is, other small businesses, B2B, then it's like, who do we know that is running a small business, and can we get them on the phone, for 10 or 15 minutes this weekend? And so it's this huge hustle of like, can we get some people on the phone? And then usually there'll be a survey that's created as a second step. And that survey can be sent out to those different audiences and online. Oftentimes it's going into Facebook groups and just saying, I've got this idea, I really like some feedback on it. And once you get into the survey, it's really important to ask questions around the pain point and not ask leading questions. We could do a whole nother session on how to ask questions. And so those are the two things I've seen really successful as far as including in your presentation at the end of the weekend. And that's just not for Startup Weekend, that's just creating a startup in general. The other things I've seen successful is, asking on Reddit, on Quora, on Hacker News, going on, and if your customers are there, sometimes asking questions there can be really beneficial as one more data point. And then looking at Google Keyword Planner and Google Trends is just another kind of supplementary data point that can help you learn more about if your customers are searching for those keywords, and then on the other end, putting a landing page up and actually sending traffic to a page, even though you don't have the product built. That's another great way to learn a little bit more. And then I think the next step after that, I've seen a lot of teams use Lean Stack. And that's usually not the thing that's done over the weekend, but sort of a next step after the weekend. But all of that falls under customer discovery, and really what's going on this weekend with the one-on-one conversations and the surveys is really where you're going to get that earliest signal.
Absolutely. The one thing, I recruit founders all year long, and I say I recruit. I mean, ultimately, I do need to put together a class of 10 companies each year. However, my job is really to help entrepreneurs succeed. I mean, I love, love, love talking to founders. And so every time I talk to founders, no matter where they are in their journey, we inevitably end up talking about this connection to the customer and really making sure, are you onto something here? Have you found that click yet? And it can be an early click. It doesn't have to be perfect yet, but lean into it. And one of the frameworks many of the coaches like me uses is this jobs to be done framework, which I'm sure you've come across as well. But standing in the shoes of the customer the entire journey, not in your own shoes, because we always think, oh, we have this great product, of course they're going to see benefit, so let's just talk about benefits to them. But maybe stand back and say, okay, there's a person here, and this person wants to be able to, even think of this problem in the first place. How do they even come up with wanting to, do something to solve their problem in this area, all the way through? Great. So they're thinking about this problem. Now, where do they go? Where do they go to even try to solve it? Is it, go search online? Is it call someone? Is it talk to a friend about it and maybe find referrals? And then how do they find the types of people who are offering that problem, right? So how do they find me and my business idea? Where would I be potentially? And then through, deciding to sign up for the product, if it's paid money or even put in an email address, what's going through their minds? Are they concerned about privacy? Are they concerned about cost? Are they concerned about trust? Is a big one. Do I trust that this product's going to work? Or, really finding that value connection through onboarding them. How is that experience? All the way through to, at the end of the day, having them scream about how excited they are to their friends about using this product. So really standing in the customer's shoes the entire journey is so hard sometimes because we have this great idea, but being able to do that is so valuable.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right. It's easy to think, have a focus group of one, which is, I think this is a good idea and I think everybody else is going to want it. I'm curious from your perspective too. I know you've done some investing. What have you seen work really well for customer discovery?
Yeah, I've seen a whole bunch of different types of activities. So at the very, very top of the funnel, how do they even come up with this in the first place? We really focus on the understanding just the context of the problem that they're solving. So questions around, let's say it's a particular healthcare app or education. Let's take education. So let's take weekdays, right? How does the usually parent come up with the idea in the first place? What's been going on? So even just asking questions around, so how's it going with schooling and your child? What do you like about, school today? What don't you like about school today? When they lean into something about, we don't like this, wow, well, where do you learn about different types of educational opportunities, right? So really kind of just asking questions around the context of what the parent or the buyer is going through. And those people can be found anywhere. But I do encourage, a lot of people jump to surveys right away. I encourage them to reach out to individuals, whether it's just a random introduction from a friend to someone else. Just say, hey, my friend here is working on an idea. Would you be willing to answer some questions around it if they fit generally within the target that you're looking for? Many people jump to surveys right away, and surveys are really valuable. They are, but that's going to be almost surface information. One of the things you get in these one-on-one conversations, I think, is the body language and some of the reactions people have that maybe are side comments. And those are really important to listen to as well. You're going to see commonalities and you're going to see outliers. So yeah, those are just some of the things to think about.
I think that's such a great point. And
yeah.
You can start to see themes. Oh,
yeah,
you can start to see themes really quickly when you jump on the phone, which is great too.
Yeah, for sure. Whether it's phone or even Zoom or in person when we're able to move around in person. Yeah. The type of people are very. You mentioned introverts, so a lot of people who are really good, let's say, at creating on their own, creating magic and products don't necessarily, I mean, many of them are also extroverts, but many are also introverts. How do they even start to have that conversation? One of the things I like to coach people, and this goes for sales too, is to say, hey, you're not selling. What you're doing is you're helping people to articulate and solve their problems. So you are the guide to them articulating and solving their problems. And if you go in that mindset, you're helping someone else, it really takes away a lot of the fear.
That's such a great point. I think you feel like when you pick up the phone, like you're coming across like in a sales way, because most of the phone calls that you get, nowadays are sort of spam. But when people love to answer questions.
Yeah.
And so I think, once you get people talking, it's really easy, but it is hard to actually just that very first, it feels awkward at first, but we've all gone through it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. And actually, not only do they love to answer questions, people like to answer questions about themselves and their feelings and the frustrations and the things that aren't working and things that they've loved and that have worked and their experiences. So yeah, for sure. Good. Well, so what else should we give our teams kind of to send them off into the day to get stuff done as effectively as possible? They've got to finish up their development. They've got to put together their business models. They've got to really get some validation from the market. They have to put together their pitch decks, get ready to pitch. What are some of the other things that are maybe common, I don't know, things people don't think about that we should tell them now?
I think that, blocking out some time before the pitch to actually practice. And maybe everybody's already done that, but no matter where you are, there has to be a point where you just have to stop and then make sure that the story that you're telling really comes across as far as the pain point, why you have that solution based on whatever customer discovery you have so far, and how you're thinking about this being a business or monetizing it. None of this needs to be set in stone or concrete, but just practicing that story. Who on the team is going to share it? Are you going to switch off? And how does that transition happen? I think that part is so important because, the presentation is really what the judges are going to be looking at in the end.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So take time to practice. And to be honest, if you don't say the exact word that you thought you were supposed to say on that slide, remember you're telling a story. So as long as you've spent 24 hours doing this, right? As long as you know what topic you're talking about, you really can't get it wrong. Just be confident, tell the story, get people excited about it. And I think that's really good advice. Good. Well, gosh, this is just, first of all, I'm just so glad that we connected, and I look forward to more connections in the future. And especially since we have a Pacific Northwest connection here, and I really want to learn more about weekdays because I think that's brilliant. Iowa's a big education state, and we've had many companies start up in Iowa around educate. There's an Iowa Education Collaborative, and there are a lot of people who are part of the startup ecosystem who are really leaning into education and making sure that we aren't just going down this track of following each step, but really thinking outside the box. And so I think what you're doing with micro schools sounds amazing. Actually, before we jump off, could you tell us just a tiny bit about micro schools?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I was really solving my own pain point as a new parent, and many people might know, but there's a shortage of early child education spots in the country, and it's called the childcare desert. And there's all this research that's been done about it, so it's pretty well known. But really, when you look at what most of the solutions are, it's really big centers for children who are, they'll go into a preschool class of like 20 to 30 kids. And I just really, all of the trends now are on personalized learning and small groups, and that's what I wanted for my own child. And so we've really focused on changing the place. So most of these are home-based micro schools. We have some within organizations. And by the way, we have a wait list in Iowa, so we should talk.
Nice, for sure. We've got so many people who could jump into that conversation.
Yeah. So it was really just looking at how do we change the paradigm, and the other end of this is preschool teachers don't make enough to live oftentimes where they work because they're one of the lowest paid professions. And so there were sort of all kinds of things that weren't right about this industry, and it was one of the industries that, when you look at it across, from an investor or VC standpoint, it wasn't. It was sort of a legacy industry, like not a lot had been done. So I started doing some experimentation and early customer discovery within a VC firm, because at that point I was working as a partner within a VC firm, and really started to feel like this is a mission and that I'm personally passionate about, and there's a incredible need for. I mean, education hasn't changed, in 100+ years since we created what we have right now, which was based on the Industrial Revolution. And so we're starting with early child education, but really the goal is to help children across, also K through 12 with small personalized groups so they can learn how they learn best, not going into a standardized class where it's focused on memorization and standardization. And we're really focused on creativity and learning around each child. So that's really the mission behind it and the focus. And we launched a year ago, and then the pandemic happened. And so it really had all kinds of tailwinds for education to, start to reimagine different ways that we can learn and learn within our neighborhoods.
For sure. And the lucky kids who are going through that. I think you might have Ben, who is going to join us here for a little bit before and go over the schedule for the rest of the day, has a 6-year-old daughter, and I think could be a great candidate for a micro school. So there you have it. Welcome back, Ben.
Thank you. What a wonderful conversation, you two. Appreciate all the insight and experiential wisdom that was shared. Absolutely an area of interest that I did not care about in the past, but with a little startup that pays in love, all of a sudden that narrative changes. And so indeed, I am curious, Shauna, about your platform and this just creating an opportunity to allow kids to explore what they're interested in and learn, and having it more on that side of the spectrum compared to like systematic daycare flavored activities. And so I'm definitely curious to learn more about your work, and thank you for the history lesson paired with all sorts of valuable insight for our participants and for the viewers who might be tuning into this live or afterwards. We just threw a tweet out to share one of our photos from our caffeinated conversation earlier. If you are still tuning in, my name is Ben McDougall, and it's been a treat to facilitate Startup Weekend Iowa online version. And we've had a lot of fun building together. If we might want to take a quick peek at our schedule just to kind of wrap up this live stream. As you can see, we started yesterday, had a wonderful keynote conversation with Nico from Speako, and the team got to work after some time networking. We've got kind of a head-to-head, two teams building into two very different directions, but they continue to build together and working through some marketing conversations supported by mentors, learning about that customer discovery that Curdy and Shauna discussed, starting to create some paying customers before taking a quick break and beginning to look towards demo day. That's going to be tonight. 7 p.m. Central Time will be a moment that you might want to mark on your calendar as we bring the teams in. We've got a very remarkable collection of judges who will be awarding some neat prize packages to our participants, and then celebrating the activities that have conspired here over the last 24 hours. And so that is a quick peek at what we have coming up. And where we have come from. This has been another wonderful discussion. Curdy, Shauna, thank you for once again sharing some transparent conversations that were riddled with key takeaways. Looking forward to continuing having you support our participants. And if you're curious about what Startup Weekend is all about, feel free to take a peek, whether it's participating in Iowa within a local entrepreneurial ecosystem and connecting it to our statewide work, or maybe it's somewhere else around the globe. This is a powerful platform that allows people to come together and build like a startup. So cheers. Let's keep building.
All right.
All right.
See you later.
See you later.